All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Becki Young, and I'm here with my partner, Sandra Grossman. And today is the 11th of December, and we're here to talk to you about policy and political developments that we expect in the coming days, and also the coming days until January 20th, and then the days after January 20th. So I think that there might be folks here with sort of different levels of interest. And so I would ask as we go along if there are particular topics that interest you, that you could put them in the comments and we'll do our best to address them. And we'll definitely offer an opportunity for questions at the end, but you can also feel free to pipe in and ask questions as we go along. So we're going to cover a few areas today. My area of expertise within immigration law is business immigration, and so I will be focusing on business immigration developments, and Sandra's practice focuses on the humanitarian and enforcement aspects, so she'll be touching on those. And we wanted to start off by talking about some of the things that could happen between now and January 20th. I'll be going through those. And then Sandra is going to give her predictions for what she thinks might happen in the new administration with regard to humanitarian areas of immigration law. And then I will give my predictions about employment-based immigration law. And then, as I said, at the end, we will be happy to have a discussion and address any questions that you may have. So to start off with things that may be finalized before January 20th, there are three types of actions that we might expect before January 20th, three broad categories of actions. The first are executive actions, and we've seen a lot of that during this administration. The travel ban is a great example of an executive action. So those are decisions that the president can make pretty swiftly, and those would be easy for the administration to complete before January 20th if they have the will to do so. The second category are regulatory actions, and depending on sort of where the regulation is in the process, it may be harder or easier for that to happen before January 20th. And then the last type of general category are policies, internal policies, memos. Those also can happen pretty swiftly. So let's go through each category of potential actions and talk about what's happening. There are three types of presidential actions or executive orders that we should be on the lookout for. One relates to birthright citizenship, and that is something that this administration has been talking about since its inception. They would like to eliminate birthright citizenship for individuals whose basically whose parents are undocumented and who come to the US and have children here. So the 14th Amendment of the Constitution says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the US. And so the legal argument that the administration makes relates to subject to the jurisdiction of. They believe that they have an argument that undocumented individuals are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Most legal scholars disagree, but this is their argument, and there could potentially be an executive action in that regard. So I think that's a big change that could potentially happen. Another item relates to the Schengen Travel Ban. So as you may know, individuals who are in any of the 26 European countries that are members of the Schengen Travel Ban cannot travel directly to the US at this time. If you've been in any of those countries for 14 days before coming to the US, you will not be admitted to the US. And so there's a rumor that Trump may lift that travel ban in order to put Biden in a corner. So stay tuned, but that's what the rumor says. And then there are proclamations relating to the issuance of certain H visas, H1B, H2B, L visas, and J visas. And it is likely that these proclamations will be extended. They're supposed to expire on December 31st, but it's likely that they will be extended, and then the new administration would have to take action to reset them. So that's in the category of presidential actions, what might happen. With regard to regulatory actions, most administrations at this point do try to get in as many regulations as possible under the wire. And so we can definitely expect and have seen action in this regard. There are a number of categories of regulations, sort of as they progress along their way. So the regulations that are most likely to be published or finalized are regulations that are with the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. So basically, after a regulation goes through all the process, it gets to this final step. And there are a bunch of regulations in that stage. There are mostly humanitarian, asylum, immigration court related regulations. I'll ask when Sandra, if she has, and if she'd like to add anything about that, she's welcome to do so. But those regulations are largely related to humanitarian topics. The next category of regulations are interim final rules that have been set aside on procedural grounds by a court. And there are 2 H1B rules that are in that position. And so after the regulations that are with OIRA, these are the second most likely to actually happen. So if you tuned in last week, we had a webinar on these H1B rules. So one rule relates to LCAs, and it actually relates to H1Bs and PERM. So any filing that requires a prevailing wage determination, the administration had inflated these very artificially overnight, and now the court's decision has restored them to their previous level. But the administration could take action in that regard. And then there's also the specialty occupation rule, which changed the definition of specialty occupation, and also some rules relating to third-party placement for H1Bs. So those rules could potentially go back into effect if the administration takes appropriate action. And if you want to learn more about those rules, our presentation from last Friday is recorded. The third category of regulations, again, these are in descending order of how likely they are to happen, are proposed regulations where the comment period has closed and final rules are being drafted. So this requires a little more effort from the administration. There are some important rules here, elimination of duration of status. So right now, F1 students and J1s can remain in the US for what's called duration of status, or D/S. And that gives them a number of benefits, including the fact that they don't accrue unlawful presence while they're in D/S. So the administration would like to take that privilege away. Also, the H1B lottery proposed rule. So the administration proposed to retool the annual H1B lottery so that only individuals with the very highest wages could participate in the lottery. There are basically 4 levels of wages, 4, 3, 2, 1, and essentially only level 4 occupations would be likely to get into the lottery just because of the limited numbers available. So it would really completely reverse the way that the H1B lottery is done. So that's the third category. The fourth category of regulations are proposed regulations that were published, but the comment rule remains open. And the one that I noticed there is about B1 in lieu of H1B. So H1B is a visa for professional workers. B1 is just a tourist visa, or a business visitor visa. And there's a special category called B1 in lieu of H1B, which essentially allows certain people to come to the US as visitors and work if they meet certain requirements. That's B in lieu of H1B. And so there is a rule in the works to eliminate that. And then the last category are proposed regulations that are pending OIRA review. So those are the least likely of the 5 categories to actually have anything happen to them. There is a really important one in there, which is about H4 EADs. So certain dependents of H1Bs can receive work authorization. That's been very controversial. And this administration has mentioned on many occasions that it would like to strike it down. It's nearly impossible for them to do that at this point. So that's good news, but it is, sort of on the bottom of the list. Okay, so we talked about executive actions, we talked about regulations, and then finally there are policy, manual procedural updates. Those are really easy to put into place. I guess one that we should talk about just briefly here are revisions to the naturalization tests. The Immigration Service just did implement revisions to the naturalization test that make it much more difficult. And that's the type of thing that they could really do overnight if they wish to do so. I wanted to say one other thing about what might happen between now and January 20th, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sandra. So a lot of these sort of proposed regulations or regulations that are being challenged are challenged on the basis that Todd Wolf, who is the Secretary of DHS, or has been, I don't know what the word is, he's allegedly the Secretary of DHS, according to opponents, hasn't been properly appointed and doesn't have authority to act as DHS Secretary. So a lot of the legal arguments in these cases are based on the fact that he was not properly appointed and doesn't have proper authority. So if courts do find him to have proper authority, then that could impact a lot of these pending regulations. So with that being said, that's a very broad summary of what might happen in the next 40 or so days. And now, Sandra, I'd love to turn it over to you. And if you can tell us about what you think President Biden might do with regard to humanitarian immigration, that would be great.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. Thank you, Becki, for the introduction. I'm Sandra Grossman. I'm a partner at Grossman, Young and Hammond. And I did just want to address what Becki brought up, which was this forthcoming publication of a final rule that's supposed to streamline and enhance, I'm going to put those in air quotes, procedures for the adjudication of certain claims for protections, both for asylum and protection under the Convention Against Torture. And the rule is a joint rule between the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. The idea being to more effectively separate baseless claims, or what the agencies see as baseless claims, from meritorious ones. And so they're going to streamline procedures so that, for example, now, if an individual passes what's called a credible fear interview, meaning that they can establish a significant possibility that they would be successful on an asylum claim, they'll no longer be put into proceedings in the way that it was under Section 240 of the Immigration Act, which basically allowed them to request any kind of defense from removal, even if it ended up not being an asylum claim. Now they'll only be eligible to establish that they merit asylum or withholding of removal or protection under the Convention Against Torture. So it's going to really limit the defenses to deportation that people have available to them. And it's going to allow immigration judges to pre-termit asylum applications without a hearing if there's no prima facie eligibility for relief. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about that final rule. And then Becki mentioned, I think you used the words, this administration is putting Biden in a corner. And I think that's certainly kind of the theme of, I think, what's going to be the first year for the new administration. On the one hand, I think the Biden administration has very publicly stated that it's going to have a more humane immigration policy. So when you look at Biden's plan for what he calls securing our values as a nation of immigrants, the new administration spends a lot of time talking about statistics, about the positive economic impact of migrants. They critique the wall and the family separation. The administration notes, that the real threat to the security of U.S. citizens and of the United States are drug cartels and human traffickers, not people fleeing devastating situations in their home country. At the same time, the Biden administration has appointed Alejandro Mayorkas to lead the Department of Homeland Security. He is the first Latino immigrant to be named to this post. and he was former Deputy Secretary of DHS under the Obama administration. So I think sort of to lead into this, there's going to be a change in the way that immigration is portrayed in the messaging on the part of this administration, that will tend to be focused much more on sort of humanitarian principles. But that said, I think the Biden administration is going to face tremendous challenges that will continue at the U.S. southern border due to the ongoing crisis in the Northern Triangle countries in Central America. That combined with the COVID pandemic and the fact that the United States continues to be a divided nation in terms of, where we stand on the issue of immigration, I think all of those factors are really going to be putting Biden in a corner, as Becki mentioned. And so, whatever his priorities may be, it's going to be affected by that kind of trifecta of reality that the administration has to deal with. I think in the first year, we can certainly expect that the Biden administration will take up the travel ban. So, as you may know, the travel ban it's been called in the press, the Muslim travel ban blocks individuals from 12 different countries. It's been the subject of numerous legal challenges, all of which the travel ban has survived. And Biden has said he will rescind the travel ban, and he can do that under his authority as the president of the United States, in the same way that that President Trump was able to instill the travel ban. So really, I think pretty much with with using his pen, he can reverse the travel ban. It might be subject to legal challenges, but I think it's pretty well established that he can move fairly quickly on that. I also think Biden, in terms of what's happening at the southern border and the continuing influx of people fleeing from Central America, Biden says he will reverse many of the Trump administration's policies, including so we have the migrant protection protocols, which were a series of policies instituted by the Trump administration to deter asylum seekers and send a message to prospective asylum seekers that they're not going to be welcome here in the United States. So the migrant protection protocols included programs like Remain in Mexico, prosecuting adult asylum seekers for misdemeanor illegal entry, and metering, which is limiting the number of asylum seekers admitted each day. Now, what that has resulted in is sort of refugee tent cities at our southern border. And that's going to require a cohesive policy on the part of the Biden administration. The administration has said that it is coming up with ways to dramatically increase government resources to support those immigrants awaiting the assessment of their asylum claims, and that they're going to dedicate resources to organizing sort of how to provide for their needs. Now, this falls short of reinstituting the asylum system that was previously in place. But I think that we can expect, those types of changes at the southern border. I think the Biden administration is going to spend more time and energy and resources focusing on the root causes of migration: violence, insecurity, lack of economic opportunity, corrupt governance. And we can expect to see the return of aid packages, perhaps greater support to multilateral institutions, U.S. government institutions like USAID. And then finally, within the context of asylum, under the Trump administration, the Attorney General was able to limit the classes of people that could seek asylum, for example, limiting asylum for victims of domestic violence. I think under a Biden administration, we will see the recertification of those cases and we can expect some changes in asylum law itself. Now, another place where Biden has said he would act very differently is on DACA and TPS. So DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is a policy that affects around 1.1 million young people in the United States who were brought here illegally through no fault of their own. And well, I should say they were either brought here illegally or have ended up falling out of status. And under the Trump administration, of course, we saw numerous efforts to limit and end DACA. Biden has said that he would reinstate the program, and actually a federal judge did that for him on December 4th, ordering the Department of Homeland Security to fully reinstate the program. But I think what Biden will be looking for and his administration and what they've promised is a much more permanent solution for beneficiaries of DACA. Right now, if you're a DACA beneficiary, all you get is work authorization and permission to be in the United States. But you have to renew that every couple of years. There's no pathway towards residency or citizenship. And what's going to be incredibly difficult for the Biden administration is that they can't, with a stroke of a pen, they're not going to be able to put DACA beneficiaries on a pathway to citizenship. It's really something that has to be taken up by Congress. So we go back again to, you know, who, in which party's hands, will control Congress, and whether legislators will be able to come up with a deal for these DACA beneficiaries, or if they'll continue to be sort of a political football. So, but I think under a Biden administration, there'll be increased pressure to really come up with a more permanent solution, as well as, in general, comprehensive immigration reform. And I think we can expect the administration to make great efforts on that front. Similarly, on TPS, TPS is temporary protected status for individuals from certain countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Sudan, Haiti. There's about 400,000 TPS beneficiaries whose benefits were set to expire in January. Those TPS beneficiaries' status will be extended now by USCIS through October 4th, 2021, which means that all of those individuals will continue to have work authorization through October, which is certainly good news for those individuals and their employers. But again, given the pandemic, given ongoing and new recent problems in Central America, like 2 massive hurricanes that those countries are now dealing with, I think it'll be on the Biden administration to, again, look at the issue of TPS and comprehensive immigration reform in a much more serious way. Then in terms of other sort of priorities in the first year for the Biden administration, he has numerous times talked about the issue of family separation, that the family separation is no longer in practice, supposedly under the Trump administration. But there's still the question of, I believe it's around 500 or more children who have not been reunited with their parents. This is the source of numerous sort of ongoing litigation, and Biden has not commented, and he will have to decide on the issue of reparations. He has not commented on if his administration will look at reparations for children that have been separated from parents. So he will have to sort of speak to whether or not he will support that. He has made a commitment to end workplace raids, which has also been politically divisive and certainly garnered much media attention during the Trump administration. He's committed to ending that. And then another important point for individuals without permanent status in this country is there's going to be a push to restore what Biden calls sensible enforcement priorities. So under the Trump administration, basically any individual who was here without lawful status was considered an enforcement priority for deportation. And I think we can expect a return to what we saw under the Obama administration, which was more about prioritizing people with recent immigration violations, as well as criminal issues and other sort of inadmissibility concerns. So I think, again, these are all sort of policy priorities that I think we'll see in the first year. But I think the theme of this is really Biden being in a corner, considering, the pandemic, especially the continuing influx of people from the Northern Triangle countries, and then the real crisis that's at the border right now that he's going to have to deal with. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that at the end, but I'll turn it back over to Becki so she can talk about some of the employment-based issues we can expect. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. So I have 9 points that I'd like to tell you about that Biden has proposed are important to him in terms of employment-based and related topics. And so the first one relates to H-2As and H-2Bs, which our office doesn't deal with a lot, but these are temporary agricultural workers as well as temporary seasonal workers. And this is sort of the first priority for him is to make the system more fair and make it easier for employers to be able to sponsor such workers where there is a real lack of U.S. labor available. So that's the first point, is relating to temporary, seasonal, and agricultural workers. The second point relates to the temporary visa system for other types of workers, mainly professional workers. And that I think is really interesting. So, one thing that I think all immigration lawyers are looking forward to the new administration taking place. It's been an extremely challenging 4 years for immigration lawyers, immigrants, employers of immigrants, etc. But the Biden administration is not unequivocally supportive of employment-based non-immigrants. And when I say that, what I mean is Biden says that he will work with Congress to reform temporary visas to establish a wage-based allocation process. And so the H1B lottery, the new H1B lottery process that I mentioned earlier, where the numbers go first to people with the highest salaries and they're allocated basically in order of the salary level. He's not necessarily saying that he's opposed to that. And I think that we could actually see more of that. He does specifically say that he's in favor of a wage-based allocation process for temporary workers. So that's really an important point to keep in mind, that the news is not 100% sunny with regard to employment-based immigration. Still, it will be a huge improvement, no doubt. The third the third category, actually, this is not strictly employment-based, but this relates to families of immigrants. So right now, there are a lot of family members of immigrants who are in a very long process, who don't have work authorization, or maybe don't even have authorization to come to the US. And so he says that he will allow any approved applicant for an immigrant visa to receive a temporary non-immigrant visa until they get their permanent visa. So this is for people who are stuck outside the US for a long time, and supporting legislation that treats the spouse and children of green card holders as immediate relatives, and allowing parents to bring their minor children with them. So he's elevating family-based immigration and making it a very important priority. The next item, the fourth item in his plan, relates to the DV lottery, the visa lottery. So every year, the United States gives away about 50,000 green cards to diversity immigrants. So essentially what we do is we take out the countries that had the highest level of immigration. And if you're not from one of those countries, then you qualify for a lottery green card. And the lottery green cards, the lottery is conducted every year in the month of October, and it is free to participate. There are some immigrant visa fees at the later stage, but it's a really great way to increase diversity in our immigrant pool. And so that also is an expressed priority of this incoming administration. He also mentions as his fifth improvement that he would like to increase the number of visas offered for permanent immigration based on macroeconomic conditions. And I think as a immigration, as someone who's been working in business immigration for a long time, this actually makes a lot of sense. So right now, the system is very ad hoc in terms of which employers can sponsor immigrants and which immigrants can be sponsored. It is based on need, but not necessarily based on the most need. And so what he's suggesting is that that economic conditions would actually determine who could receive a green card in the employment-based categories. And so I think in principle, that's a good idea. He also says that he would exempt recent graduates of STEM PhD programs from any caps. So that's all part of the fifth plank in his platform, immigration platform. The sixth item is creating a new visa category to allow cities and counties to petition for higher level of immigrants to support their growth. And I also think that's a fantastic idea. That's actually an idea that I've been espousing personally for a long time. When I hear about geographic areas in the US that really, really need workers, and I hear about people who would really, really like to come to the US, it seems to me like there's a big mismatch. And if we could have a system that actually matched up with those geographic areas with those individuals, I think that could be a real win-win for everybody. The seventh plank in his platform is about enforcing the rules to protect American and foreign workers. And so this is more of what I was mentioning earlier with regard to, wage-based allocation system. He says that the immigration system must guard against economy-wide wage cuts due to exploitation of foreign workers by unscrupulous employers who undercut the system by hiring immigrant workers below the market rate or go outside the immigration system to find workers. So he says he will work with Congress to ensure that employers are not taking advantage of immigrant workers and US citizen workers are not being undercut. So that's a kind of a shift in tone from prior Democratic administrations. It's also a shift in tone from the current administration, but I think that's really an important signal of where this administration may be going. An eighth point in his immigration plan, and I'm sort of skipping through a few, I should say, like the eighth thing that I found interesting was that he specifically said he would like to support entrepreneur incubators targeted toward immigrants and providing resources to help access business loans, mentoring, and capital. So one really interesting aspect of our immigration laws is that we don't have a good system or a good category for entrepreneurs. We do have investor visas, which are visas that allow individuals from certain countries. So if you are a citizen of a country that has a bilateral investment treaty with the US and you invest a substantial amount of capital in the US, then you can get a visa to come and develop your company in the US. But if you're a genius and you have a brilliant idea that doesn't require capital to develop it, or you're from India, for example, or Russia, or any of the many other countries that does not have a bilateral investment treaty with the US, you can't get a visa to come to the US for self-employment. So all of these entrepreneurs are kind of categorically excluded from coming to work in the US, and it's a real shame. And there are lots of sort of creative fixes, and people are doing a lot of things that are in gray areas, but the unfortunate truth is that we consult very frequently with people who have great ideas and would contribute substantially to the US economy, and in many cases have secured substantial, venture capital funding, but there's no visa category that applies to them. So I think that would be a really important point. He doesn't go so far as to say that he's going to restore entrepreneurial parole. So the Obama administration had actually created a new category called entrepreneurial parole, which would provide a way for the individuals I just described to be able to work legally in the US. Biden never specifically said that he would bring that back, but he does specifically mention supporting entrepreneurs. So I think that would be important and certainly something that I would be in favor of personally. The last item that I thought was notable in his plan does relate to enforcement and specifically border screening. So one of the things that this president has spent a lot of effort and energy and money on is this giant border wall with Mexico, which is, I think unlikely to be effective in the long run. And I suspect there are many more effective ways to screen people at the border. Biden says that he will invest in better technology, things like cameras, sensors, X-ray machines, that he will improve cross-agency collaboration, and finally, that he will work with our neighbors in Mexico and Canada as partners and not as adversaries. So those were the points in his immigration plan that I found most notable and most interesting. It remains to be seen how many of those will actually be implemented. He obviously has a lot of challenges on his hands when he takes office on January 20th. But I think, that's the overview of what we expect and hope may happen. So Sandra, I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts, and then if anyone here has questions, we'd be more than happy to try to address them or comments.
Just thank you, Becki. Very briefly, I think another sort of practical aspect to the transition and sort of crafting a new immigration policy, again, will be the reality of the pandemic. I was just on a call with, I'm part of the Department of State. We have, through the American Immigration Lawyers Association, we have a Department of State liaison committee, and we just met with certain members of Department of State visa office and operations. And I think the reality is that we're dealing with an unknown number of both immigrant and non-immigrant visa petitions that are in a backlog being housed somewhere, somehow, without a real policy for how to address the backlog. So even, if we have a shift in priorities, there's going to be this practical aspect of how to get places like the National Visa Center, which processes these visa petitions, how to get those back up and running again. There's issues of funding related to consular affairs and consular officers, which will require congressional support in terms of budgeting. So I think that's, another pretty significant challenge that's going to be faced by the Biden administration. So all of that said, I think, there's an opportunity under the administration for a more humane immigration policy that understands the value of immigrants in the United States, both from a humanitarian and an economic point of view. So thank you. And we're open for any questions. And Becki, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else.
I think I am going to put everybody in gallery view. So if there is anyone who would like to ask a question, please feel free to do so. Some people have been making comments or asking questions in the chat. And if there's anything that you would like to ask publicly, now is your opportunity. And I think, I think we're really just all looking forward to January 20th. All right. Well, it looks like we've answered all of your questions, so I'm so glad to hear that. We will be presenting another webinar. Our colleagues, Meg Hobbins and Candy Ciccone, will be presenting next Friday on the topic of preserving your green card and maintaining eligibility for naturalization. So we've been getting a lot of questions recently from permanent residents who left the US during the pandemic and have not been able to get back. And for individuals who are permanent residents, they're not supposed to leave the US for more than 6 months at a time. And so there are a lot of people that are going to be running into trouble if they haven't already, both in being eligible to apply for naturalization, but more importantly and more immediately being able to retain their green card and to return to the US as permanent residents. So if you know anyone who would be interested in that webinar, please feel free to share the information. If you're interested, please feel free to join. And otherwise, we thank you very much for joining us today, and we wish you all a very happy weekend.
Thank you, everyone.